All right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to talk a little bit more about quizzes, and what I'm going to talk about specifically is building out a quiz bank from scratch. So this is going to work almost exactly the same way that building a quiz works, but the difference here is that these questions aren't going to technically belong to a quiz until we actually add them to a quiz. So here I am at the home page of my course, and I'm going to go ahead and click on quizzes. Okay. And then, well, here's the example quiz we built last time. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to click on this cog. Instead of clicking on a new quiz, I'm going to click on this cog, and I'm going to choose Manage Question Banks. That's going to bring me here. Now I've already got a couple of question banks. Let me go ahead and delete these, because you're probably going to have something that looks more like this, where you have no questions and no question banks. So what you're going to want to do is we're going to build in a brand new question bank. So I'm going to press this Add Question Bank button. And let's go ahead and come up with a title for this question bank. So I'm going to call this Chapter 2. Because if I were still teaching biology, this would be the first chapter that I would create. Okay, and so once you've got it, go ahead and hit Return or Enter. And there is your Chapter 2 question bank. Now over here, you've got several different options. You can bookmark this question bank or not bookmark it. You can choose to edit the name of it, or you can delete it. Okay, and then if you want to actually add questions to the question bank, you're going to click on the name, and that's going to bring you to the page of this question bank. So it brings you here. It lets you choose if you want to show question details, and then over here is where you're going to have several different options. So the first option is the one we're going to work with right now, and that is to add a question. So I'm going to go ahead and click that button. And let's go ahead and start with something we know. We're going to start with a multiple choice question. So I'm going to call this question 1. It'll be worth 1 point. And I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, which of the following is not one of the 4 elements that makes up 96% of humans by mass? So the elements I like to call the big 4 elements are going to be carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and hydrogen. So those are the big 4 that make up about 96% of our body mass. And an example of an element that doesn't fall into that category, which is a trace element, is iodine. So there's my multiple choice. I've got everything here that I need. Again, if I want to, I can go ahead and add explanations to each of these, but I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to update the question. Okay, so there's question 1. Let's go ahead and add a second question. So I'm going to go ahead and click Add a Question. And let's talk about the next kind of question we could do. Let's do a fill in the blank. So instead of doing a true false, which we've already done, we're going to do in fill in the blank. Okay, so this is going to work a little differently from multiple choice. You'll read right here, enter your question text, then define all possible correct answers for the blank. Students will see the question followed by a small text box to type their answer. So for example, let's say that I wanted to know, I would say, okay, an atom has an atomic number of 1 and an atomic mass of 3. How many neutrons are in the nucleus of this atom? This is not really a great fill-in-the-blank question, but I'm just trying to use an example here. So the correct answer for this, in case you are not inclined towards chemistry or biology, just so you understand, the mass number, or the atomic mass, is defined as the summation of neutrons and protons. Here I've got an atomic number, which tells me the number of protons in this atom. So that is telling me that this particular atom has 1 proton. It's got an atomic mass of 3, which means it should have 2 neutrons. But some students might write the number 2, and some students might write 2 spelled out. So both of those are potentially correct. And I don't want to penalize students for writing the number versus writing out the word 2. So I'm going to include either one. And I'm going to go ahead and update the question. All right, so there we go. So I've got two questions defined. Oh, and I forgot to define this as question number 2. So let me go ahead and do that. All right. So we've got two questions built out thus far. Okay, let's keep going. Let's go ahead and add another question. So this is going to be question 3. And let's go ahead and do multiple answers. So I'm going to say, please choose the element that would be classified as trace elements. Right, so I'm going to say fluorine and iodine, which are both trace elements. Then we'll do carbon. We will do sodium. Let's go ahead and add another answer. We'll do potassium. And then we'll go ahead and update this question. But before we do, since the students might need to choose more than one, I'm going to go ahead and put that here. So in bold, I'll say note, you may need to choose more than one answer. There we go. Let's go ahead and save this. So I'll update the question. Okay, so we're rolling. We've got 3 questions now. Let's go ahead and add another question. Okay, so question number 4, instead of multiple answers, I'm going to do matching. Okay, so this is kind of cool. You get to build these matching drop-downs where students have to pick one answer here and match it appropriately with the answer over here. So here I could say, match the name of the element to its elemental symbol. Here I'm going to have carbon, that's a C, nitrogen, an N, oxygen, an O, and hydrogen, an H. Okay. And then here you can actually add in distractors. So these distractors are going to be things that essentially would be incorrect. So instead of just having C or N or O or H, I could say, okay, why don't I also have cobalt and nickel and helium? I'll go ahead and update that question. All right, so let's go ahead and add a 5th question, and this one is going to be slightly different from the others. For this one, I'm going to choose a formula question. So question 5 is going to be a formula question. And I'm going to come back here to the example again of atomic mass. So let's say you are analyzing an atom of a specific element, and you notice the following things. First, say the element has an atomic number of 2. The atom of the element has, and this is important, you're going to put this variable x in these braces, has x number of neutrons in its nucleus. Now let's go ahead and say, please determine the atomic mass of this atom. So we've got an atom that has an atomic number of 2, and it has a certain number of neutrons in its nucleus. What formula questions allow you to do is they allow you to craft questions that can change depending upon which student is taking them. So it's going to randomize this question based on a numeric variable, x, and each student who takes this question is going to get a slightly different number here. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to set up the different series of numbers for x and the different potential answers. Okay, So we've done that, and when I type this X and I moved off of this line, this came up here. Now, if you don't see this here, then all you have to do after you type in your X and your braces is just click outside of the text area of the rich content editor, and this should pop up. This allows me to define a range for X. 1 to 10 right now, meaning that depending upon which student's taking this, they could get X to be 1, they could get X to be 10, and I can choose my decimal places here if I want to. I'm going to decrease this down to 5. Okay, so this takes it down to 5. Okay, and you'll notice every time I hit recompute, I have the chance of getting a slightly different number. And this is based off a random number generator. Now, obviously you'll notice every time I'm clicking it, sometimes I'm getting the same number. And this isn't broken, it's just that my range is so small. Notice if I were to go up to 50 here and hit recompute, well, now I'm going to get a different number almost every time. Okay, but I'm going to work with 5. All right, so we define the range for X. Next, we're going to define the formula that's going to be used to calculate the final answer. Okay, so we know that my atomic number is 2, and to get atomic mass, I add the atomic number to the number of neutrons, and that gives me the atomic mass. So my number of neutrons is X, so 2 plus X, and then that's going to give me my potential answer. So after you type this in, choose your decimal places. I'm going to choose 0 and click Save. And then you're going to get something like this. And this allows you to go through the different range of X values and see that your results are always coming up the way that they should be. So here X is 3, 2 plus 3 is 5. Here X is 4, 2 plus 4 is 6. So our formula is working. Okay, finally, you have to generate possible solutions. So this is where you're actually going to determine the potential range for the different versions of this that you're going to give to your students. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to type in 20 here. Okay, and this is because I want to increase the number of these different values of X so that I can enhance the total number of questions that my students might have. Now, this is going to seem kind of pointless for this one because I only have technically between 1 and 5 in terms of values for X, but if you were doing 1 to 50, but you didn't want to do all 50 potential values, you only wanted to do 20 of those, then this is where you'd get those 20 different values. So after you do this, you're going to click Generate. It's going to generate them, and then it's going to give you a list showing you, okay, you've got all of these which are potentially going to be placed into that question. And you'll notice I'm going to have X values of 5, 4, 2, 1, and 3. And some of these, especially like the 1, I may have never actually gotten to if I didn't do 20 of these. So this is where you define your range for X, this is where you define your formula, and then finally this is where you define how many of these instances of X you're going to potentially use for your questions. Your students won't see 20 values for X. Your student is going to log into the question and they're going to see one of these potential scenarios. Okay? All right, so let's go ahead. We're going to update this question. And we now have created a formula-based question. So we've got a pretty good quiz bank going here. Okay? And the cool thing is now, if I jump into my quizzes and I decide to create a brand new quiz, I can pull questions from this quiz bank. So I can go over here, I can click the plus quiz button, and then when I go to create questions for this unnamed quiz, if I want to, I can say, okay, question. I want to find questions, and notice I now have the option to choose from chapter 2. So I can choose just 3 of these if I want to, or I can choose all 5. And I can even create quiz question groups, just like we can create assignment groups if I want to. And I can then just add those questions to this quiz. And so now, once it's finished, this quiz now has those questions. Okay, so that's how you can build a quiz bank. In the next tutorial, we're going to talk a little bit more about what to do if you've already got a quiz bank that you exported from Blackboard. Okay, but for now, that is building a quiz bank in Canvas.